everyone. Welcome to my presentation. So this evening, I'm going to be talking about how different economies respond to disaster and what the future of that may look like for economic adaptation. So my research question was, what are the economic differences between how financially developed and less developed countries respond to disaster? So just to break it down, we're going to be looking at why this matters, then Vietnam's economy, which is one of the examples, and then the UK's economy, and then each of their responses to COVID, and kind of like an analysis of both and how those relate to the topic, and then kind of like the conclusions. So basically, the concept, why does this matter? Well, this day and age, as many of you guys know, there's disasters everywhere. You can just check the news, right? There's political conflicts, there's conflicts, with hunger, environmental conflicts, and by analyzing past disasters and how countries and economies, defended themselves against that, it's easy to see, we have the ability to analyze what were good things that were done and what were bad things that were done, and how we can build an economy for the future that is adaptable and can withstand any disaster, which matters a lot considering, the world is changing, you have no idea what's coming next. So two key concepts that many of you guys probably already know about, but I thought I'd just include, is socialism and capitalism. So socialism is basically, or in this sense, an economy where the government owns, or not the government, but the public owns all major corporations, such as free healthcare, that's a benefit. And so the government maps out a lot of the economy, and they have a lot of control over the currency, compared to capitalism, where there's private businesses, and the currency depends on supply and demand, and sellers decide what they want to sell, and buyers decide what they want to consume. So let's start with Vietnam's economy. So Vietnam is a socialist-oriented market economy, which means there are still private businesses, but the government does set a lot of goals for Vietnam's economy, and there is government intervention when needed. So just a brief financial summary. So Vietnam's main sources of income come from agriculture, exports, and manufacturing, which make up around 87% of the GDP. And so that just basically means that simply, they rely on a lot of other countries for things that they need. And so their nominal GDP is $4,622, and the nominal GDP means the market value of all goods and services produced, including effects from inflation and deflation. So just some graphs. But so some of the main issues is Vietnam fails to have steady banking oversight, which means they have a lot of policies put in place to make sure that there's ethical banking, but a lot of them aren't insured, and therefore there becomes blurry lines on how money is handled. And also there are gaps in workforces in higher value industries, such as tech and healthcare, meaning they can't make as much money as a country. So now we're going to look at the UK's economy. So the UK has an advanced open market economy, which basically just means that there's private businesses, things like that, and this economy is comparable to the US, or Germany, or Japan. And so just to talk about their finances, so the service sector is kind of one of their primary financial sectors where they make a lot of money, and there also are, their nominal GDP is $3.4 trillion. And so some issues that they have is, after they left the European Union, there were a lot of issues between trade, and a lot of money they lost from exports and things, and inflation also raises frequently in the UK, and therefore they have to place a lot of interest rates, which kind of stops money spending and lowers the GDP, which can be the goal, but also can get out of control sometimes. And so now we're going to look at each responses to COVID and kind of just that real world setting. So Vietnam's responses to COVID were actually pretty world renowned, and were really done very nicely, because they were able to kind of immediately and on a pretty tight budget form a bunch of quarantine centers and also do a bunch of contact tracing, which really held on to COVID and shut it down pretty quickly. But then later on in the process, because they did not have as much money, they were not able to spread the vaccine all throughout the country and all over the terrain of Vietnam. And Vietnam was unable to give as much money to their healthcare budget that was already pretty deteriorated from the effects of COVID. So now the UK's COVID response was pretty much the opposite. It went from weak to sort of strong towards the end. But so the UK, as I said, it's mainly service-based, so that means they kept a lot of their stores and things open. And for example, a lot of events stayed open, like they had soccer games, horse races, which caused a lot of COVID outbreaks, but it was basically their attempt at kind of choosing to keep their economy going versus their people. And so then there was large COVID outbreaks, which was a kind of a disaster. But towards the end of it, they were able to put a lot more money into their healthcare budget, and they kind of made economic growth sort of a priority coming out of the pandemic. So the UK's economy post-COVID was, there was definitely decreases in how much people in unemployment, or there were increases, in unemployment, and there weren't many people working just because and this happened everywhere too, but after COVID, a lot of people went into early retirement just because many didn't want to work after getting a break from it. And so they went into a bit of a recession in 2023, but after the recession, the UK's economy then again grew strongly, and the recovery from the pandemic was at a growth rate of 8.7%. So Vietnam's economy post-COVID was not great because of their strong reliance on exports, and exports really took a hit, and so they faced a lot of difficulties of supply chain issues and things like that. But their GDP grew by 7.9% in 2024, and a large drive in e-commerce really helped because the people of Vietnam started ordering a lot more things online, and that became a larger part of their culture, and therefore they were able to, grow their financial technology, which also helped with job growth. So, which economy is best? Now, kind of the main part of, or a factor of my presentation was analyzing both of these responses and kind of seeing which was, the better one to take and which would look more beneficial in creating a new economy in the future. But I think kind of what I came to realize was that they were very different and very hard to be compared just based off of size and how big their economy was prior to that. And so I think the three key things that I decided was that Vietnam's lack of having really any large system of policy was that they were able to pass things pretty quickly, and they were very efficient with organizing, which is very good in the face of a disaster. But the UK's clear outlined ethics and where their money was going to budgeting was they were able to put money there faster and therefore not lead their healthcare into such a state of deterioration. But Vietnam's ability to communicate with their people was very good because they were very in contact, and because of that, as I talked about before, their e-commerce grew a lot. So those are just some aspects that I thought were kind of important, and overall, yeah. Thank you. Okay, so I do not, I guess I was living here, so I guess I don't know. But I think that the UK was definitely a lot more similar to the US, in which they weren't very communicative with their people, and things didn't really get done that quickly. But they were able to spread the vaccine around, and obviously it wasn't perfect. Not every area got the vaccine, but I think that Vietnam was a bit more efficient, but because the UK is just a lot more comparable to the US because of their similar budgets and similar economic infrastructures. Well, just because they just didn't have as much money to set aside, I think that because it was mainly towards the healthcare budget, which was the thing that had been pretty drained after COVID. So I think that something that, like, say there was another pandemic or another issue, Vietnam might be like less prepared, but also an aspect that was very good that they were able to use to their advantage was the fact that they didn't have as big of a budget as some countries in the first place, and therefore they had to make those tighter decisions, which is less time because, you know, time is money, and the more time spent going through bureaucracy and everything, the more money spent. So, yes.
If you could choose to compare to other countries' relationships.
That's a good question. Like, based on what? Just like for fun? I think it would be interesting to actually compare maybe the US and also and maybe Germany, which are both pretty similar countries, but just like seeing how, you know, the same countries react, because I think that would be a bit more of a fair comparison, which is what I learned when I was doing this. But I also wanted to look at what are the benefits of having a smaller economy versus a larger economy. So.